A few minutes later, silence filled the hall again when the guests realized they were being noisy. Joshua invited DeAndre to say a few words and stepped to the side to let him take the stage. One of the mansion's staff handed DeAndre a microphone. He stood up with a beaming smile and walked to the front of the platform. In the past, I hid my identity and established the Cassidy family. Because of the Fallon family's rules, I had no choice but to leave. I owe my wife and the Cassidy family a lot. They've been through many hardships because of me. Now that I'm back, I'll make sure to protect them. The crowd burst into applause. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend today's celebration, DeAndre continued. Please don't be nervous. Relax and enjoy the party. The guest sitting toward the front stood up and motioned for everyone else to do the same. There was another round of applause. DeAndre enjoyed the attention. His face was glowing, and his entire being was radiant. By the time the guests took their seats again, DeAndre had already sat back down and Joshua had returned to the platform. Next on the agenda, please present your gifts. The gifts were the highlight of the celebration. The guests had been waiting for this. It was their chance to stand out and win the Cassidy family's favor. However, they hadn't realized the real reason they were invited. The Cassidy family had invited all the influential figures in Los Angeles and took the liberty of inviting the Sierra family from New York City. Unlike the rest of the guests, the Sierra family was familiar with these kind of tactics. They understood the Cassidy family's intentions. They wanted to unite the prominent families and get them on their side. Once they handed over the gifts, they would forge a connection with the Cassidy family and become their subordinate. It didn't take long for the guests to catch on, and they were reluctant to become some other family's subordinates. Although the Cassidy family was ranked first in the country, the guests had spent a lot of effort to accumulate their own assets for several generations. They didn't want to give up their independence. Helen had foreseen this issue. She already had a solution. She gave Harry a meaningful look. He stood up with a smile and addressed the guests. There's nothing to worry about. As the successor of the Cassidy family, I guarantee that if you form an alliance with our family, you won't be disappointed. The Haynes family from Santa Ana and the Sierra family from New York City are both examples. Harry had not so subtly revealed his new identity in the family. Some time ago, with Helen's support and DeAndre's agreement, Harry had been appointed the successor of the Cassidy family. Kim's status in the Fallon family was much higher than Harry's position, so DeAndre didn't care. The Cassidy family was already aware of this, but the guests weren't. From their perspective, Harry had always been the unofficial third most important member of the family. Now that his position had been made official, his words were even more trustworthy than before. Harry's speech moved the guests who were still hesitating. They expressed their support. We trust the Cassidy family. You're ranked first in the country, and you're far more prestigious than us. Your promises are worth every penny. We've prepared gifts for Mr. DeAndre. Please put in a good word for us to the Fallon family. The head of the Harmon family was the first guest to offer his gift. Mrs. Helen, Mr. DeAndre, this is a pair of matching white jade pendants. I wish you two a happy and long life together. DeAndre nodded in approval, while Helen was full of smiles. The Harmon family was one of the most well-known families in Los Angeles. Back then, the Cassidy family didn't meet the qualifications to strike up a conversation with them. So much had changed since then. The head of the Harmon family was here in person to present his gift, and Helen was delighted. She accepted the gift. Thank you for your generosity. The guests were astonished. That pendant is made of flawless white jade. It cost at least $100 million. With such an exquisite carving, it's most likely worth $1 billion. How ignorant. Did you forget about the size of the pendants? They're matching necklaces, and the raw materials alone would have cost $1.1 billion. Not to mention, carving the design could only have been possible by a world-renowned expert. The total is definitely above $2 billion. Like the guests, Kim was looking at the pendants with interest. Stephen noticed her staring. Do you want it? No, I was thinking they looked familiar. I just remembered that the Harmon family won Skyreach Corporation's auction for white jade a while back. They chatted at a normal volume, so everyone around them overheard their conversation. Rebecca stiffened. She had been eyeing the pendants with envy without knowing that the material used to craft them had been sold by Kim's company. The other guests were surprised that Kim knew where the Harmon family had gotten their hands on flawless white jade. Harry and Rebecca were in charge of arranging the seats for the Cassidy family members. The seats for the core members were at the front, while the seats for the outer circle were at the back. The two of them had arranged seats for Kim's family at the very edge. The Cassidy family knew who the member with the highest status was, but there were many guests who didn't know. They assumed that Kim's family wasn't favored by Helen or DeAndre based on where they were sitting. The crowd on the stage didn't hear their discussion. After getting Helen's recognition, the head of the Harmon family returned to his seat with a sense of accomplishment. The rest of the guests proceeded to present their gifts. They offered priceless jewelry, black cards, a certain percentage of their company's shares, vacation homes, and more. Helen couldn't stop herself from smiling. Even DeAndre, who'd maintained his calm demeanor since he arrived, showed some excitement on his face. He possessed a wide range of knowledge from his background as an aristocrat, but these gifts were considered precious even to the aristocratic families. After the Haynes family presented their gift, a small disturbance in the festive mood took place. When Angelo Sierra presented his gift, Helen and DeAndre didn't have a reaction. Stephen was not pleased to see Victoria's father being embarrassed in front of a crowd. He wasn't fond of Angelo, but he was still his grandfather. If it weren't for Kim, Stephen would have cleaned up the Cassidy family a long time ago. Although they didn't value her and oppressed her every chance they had, they were still family. Stephen knew Kim would be upset if the Cassidy family met their end. Cassidy family's infuriating, Angelo muttered when he returned to his seat. He had relatively high cultivation in martial arts, so he could easily prevent the guests from hearing his complaints. Stephanie Sierra, the current head of the family, consoled him. "Don't be upset, Grandpa. There's probably a misunderstanding somewhere. We'll ask Helen and DeAndre after the party. Stephen is your grandson, and he's Kim's husband. He used to be the commander, so the Cassidy family wouldn't be rude to his relatives without a good reason." Angelo sighed, reflecting on his past actions. "That's true, but who knows? Age doesn't cure ignorance." Compared to the Sierra family, the Haynes family was much more favored. The gift they'd prepared was a birthday card with blessings written by the head of the family. It was so common that it was practically worthless, but Helen and DeAndre had received the card with a flurry of compliments. The guests had paid a hefty price, no less than 1/10 of their wealth and assets, in order to get on the Cassidy family's good side. But the Haynes family had breezed through the gift-giving segment without spending much at all. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that they had discussed this with the Cassidy family beforehand. They were putting on a show to demonstrate how close the two families were. A seemingly failed marriage had connected two ordinary families. The guests were envious. "I should have married my daughter into the Cassidy family. The Haynes family's so lucky." Joshua silenced the side conversations by announcing the next event. The Cassidy family members would be presenting their own gifts. The guests were aware that this was the family's way of showing the public how influential they were. When outsiders presented gifts, it was proof of their loyalty. But when one of their own presented gifts, it proved their respect for the head of the family. Harry knew this was his chance. He signaled to one of the staff, who came over with a tray covered with a red cloth. Rebecca was sulking in her seat. It had been decided that Harry would be the successor of the Cassidy family, but that didn't stop her from pressuring Helen into giving her a high position. Helen had given in and promised her a decent position. Kim was the most influential member of the family, but she wasn't interested in succeeding the family anymore. Rebecca was disappointed that she'd missed her best chance to snatch the successor position. Harry was proud of himself for seizing the opportunity to take over the successor position as soon as his biggest contender, Kim, was out of the running. Helen was DeAndre's wife, and her status was second to his. But because she wasn't the head of the family, she couldn't make big decisions on her own. If DeAndre made up his mind, even Helen couldn't go against him. It was important to build a good relationship with DeAndre and leave a good impression on him. Harry had already made preparations more than half a year ago. One of the guests couldn't contain his curiosity. "What gift did you prepare?" Harry kept them in suspense. "You'll know what it is soon." Helen leaned closer to DeAndre and whispered in his ear. I watched Harry grow up. He's moral and upright. I'm positive he won't let you down. DeAndre observed Harry. He was a natural at conversing with the public. He certainly has a way with words. Harry took the tray from the staff and walked up to the platform to DeAndre. Grandpa, I prepared this gift for you. DeAndre didn't show any emotion. What is it? Harry removed the red cloth, revealing ginseng on the tray. DeAndre's eyes widened. The guests sitting closer to the front witnessed the big reveal, but they couldn't understand why DeAndre was so shocked. They started whispering to each other. Isn't that ginseng? What's so great about that? What about the gift I spent thousands of dollars on? My family runs a pharmaceutical factory. I've lost count of how much ginseng I see in a day. If I knew Mr. DeAndre liked ginseng so much, I wouldn't have given him the gift that nearly broke my bank account. Harry didn't mind the criticisms. He calmly explained, This is 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. It wasn't easy to obtain. It's a rare ingredient that used to refine a medicinal pill that can extend one's life by 10 years. DeAndre regained his composure. Thank you, Harry. This is a valuable gift. As a member of the Fallon family, he'd spent many years practicing martial arts, so he didn't have to worry about his lifespan. But Helen was different. She was reaching the end of her life. DeAndre had been pondering how he could ask the Fallon family for a longevity pill to extend Helen's life, but Harry had solved all his problems. The main ingredient in the pill was 1,000-year-old snow ginseng. And judging from the size of Harry's ginseng, it was large enough to refine 10 of those pills. Helen was impressed. The more she looked at Harry, the more pleasing he was to the eye. She hadn't made the wrong decision. Harry was the most suitable candidate to lead the Cassidy family. This is a priceless treasure, DeAndre concluded. I'm glad you like it, Harry said. He placed the tray on the table and returned to his seat. It was time for the others to present their gifts. Many of them looked at each other in dismay. Their gifts weren't as precious as Harry's. Is that ginseng really that valuable? Kim asked curiously. Stephen had heard of the legendary longevity pill before. Doctors who practice ancient medicine use the pill to treat injuries. The miracle drug developed by the research laboratory on Mirage Island contained similar ingredients. 1,000-year-old snow ginseng was valuable to ordinary people, but ultimately, it was found in the United States territory. With Stephen's status, the Leviathan unit would give him a cart of snow ginseng if he ever asked for it. As far as I know, it's not particularly valuable. Do you want one? The guests scoffed when they heard what Stephen said. What are you talking about? Someone asked. How could the snow ginseng not be valuable? Another guest chimed in. Hey, lower your voice. Can't you tell by his seat? He's sitting at the very edge. How would he know the value of snow ginseng? It probably looks like some radish in his eyes. Kim was bewildered by the contrasting claims. From the way DeAndre and the guests were reacting, the snow ginseng was valuable. So why did Stephen think it wasn't? As she contemplated, realization dawned on her. Snow ginseng was in limited supply to ordinary people, but that wasn't the case for the country. Stephen was a former commander. With his status, it was natural for him to think it wasn't valuable. He'd probably seen thousands of them before. But Stephen wasn't the commander anymore. She didn't want him to break his back just to get her a ginseng. Kim glared at the guests. That's enough. Today is my grandfather's birthday. Don't disrupt the celebration. The guests wisely kept their mouths shut. Even if Kim and Stephen weren't favored by the Cassidy family, they were still one of them. Offending them would be provoking the family. I'm sorry, Kim said, turning back to Stephen. Why are you apologizing? He didn't know where this apology was coming from. The snow ginseng wasn't a big deal to him. Frankly, he didn't need to ask the Leviathan unit for it. The storage room at the palace's base in Washington, D.C. contained several tons of snow ginseng. The ginseng Harry had given DeAndre was of normal quality. It was the same as the ginseng the palace kept at the very bottom of the storage room. If the members of the palace wanted to use some, all they needed to do was fill out an application. Stephen, as the Grand Palace Master, could forego the procedures altogether. If you want one, I can arrange for someone to bring it over when we get home, Stephen said. Kim pressed a finger to his lips and shook her head. You don't have to say anything more. I understand. Your intentions are enough for me. Stephen kept quiet. A woman's heart was as deep as the ocean. No matter how much knowledge he only had a vague understanding in this department. Valeria was sitting on Stephen's lap. She looked up at her mother and then at her father. She tilted her head, thinking hard. Understanding flashed in her eyes. She confidently said, Mommy, Daddy, you two should get a room. Stephen was amused, while Kim was mortified. Valeria, who taught you that? She asked sternly. Valeria knew she was in trouble. She glanced up at her father. Daddy taught me. Stephen's smile froze. His little girl had sold him out. Kim did not look happy. This is a celebration and we're in public, so I won't lecture you two. The father and daughter duo heaved a sigh of relief and tried to appease her. My wife is the best. Mommy is the best. Kim's frown turned into a smile. She looked friendly, but Stephen and Valeria found her expression a little scary. We'll talk about this later when we get home. With that, she turned her attention back to the platform, putting an end to the discussion. The father and daughter duo looked at each other with matched, aggrieved expressions. Harry had taken the lead, and Rebecca didn't want to be outdone. The second her brother stepped off the platform, she called the staff over and went to present her gift. Grandpa, the gift I picked out for you is just as valuable as Harry's. I'm looking forward to it, DeAndre said with a smile. Rebecca lifted the red cloth, revealing a potted plant. It resembled any other plant, except this one was made of gold. Every leaf, flower, and vein was golden in color, but there was no metallic texture. The guests were awestruck. The leaves swayed in the wind, and the flowers danced in the breeze. It was so lifelike that they couldn't figure out how this was possible. This is the golden flower of wonder, Rebecca introduced confidently. It's genuine. It was personally issued by the United States' Cultural Relics Investigation Bureau. Several gasps came from the crowd. I heard its previous owner lived over 1,000 years ago. He hired specialists to cast spells on the plant to preserve it. There were rumors that someone bought the golden flower of wonder from the Cultural Relics Investigation Bureau not too long ago. I didn't know I'd have the chance to see it in person today. Harry and Rebecca's gifts equally demonstrated how influential the Cassidy family was. Thank you, Rebecca, DeAndre said. He gave her gift a high evaluation. Rebecca was delighted. I'm glad you like it. She placed her gift on the table and went back to her seat. The other members of the Cassidy family's younger generation proceeded to present their own gifts. After Harry and Rebecca, there wasn't anything shocking, but they were still considered valuable. DeAndre accepted them with nods of approval. These gifts were from their own people, so he had to acknowledge everyone. Soon, it was Kim and Stephen's turn. They retrieved their gift from the mansion staff and went to the front of the hall with Valeria. Stephen took the lead and greeted DeAndre. He unveiled a ceramic bowl with a red hue and a splash of crimson. This is Juneware crafted a millennia ago. Junewares were priceless antiques. The more ancient they were, the more valuable they were. One of the guests couldn't contain her surprise. The Cassidy family really can't be underestimated. Even people who marry into the family can casually take out a treasured antique and hand it over as a gift. The crowd's impression of the Cassidy family rose. They expected DeAndre to give a few words of praise as he'd done with the rest of the family. But his expression turned solemn. Helen gave Harry and Rebecca a meaningful look below the platform. This was their opportunity to kick Stephen out of the family. When Kim was too distracted to manage her company properly, the family would take it off her hands and divide it amongst themselves. With Skyreach Corporation in their possession, their family's wealth would be overflowing. Harry stood up and spoke first. Stephen, how do we know your claims are credible? He didn't think Stephen's gift was authentic. The ceramic he'd described was so rare that no amount of money would ever be enough. Moreover, when Harry and Rebecca informed Kim of the celebration, they downplayed the event. They wouldn't be surprised if she and Stephen didn't spend that much on DeAndre's gift. They were both certain that Stephen's antique was a fake. Rebecca stood up and backed up her brother. What do you know about antiques? The guests observed the conflict from their seats. They were wondering why the Cassidy family's younger generation was publicizing their internal conflict. But it was the successor who'd spoken. Could Stephen's gift really be fake? Kim gave them a disdainful look. Harry, Rebecca, don't cross the line. It's not up for you to decide its authenticity. Before Stephen could say anything, DeAndre slammed the table. He silenced Harry and Rebecca with a glare before turning back to Stephen. Do you have proof that this is authentic Juneware from 1,000 years ago? Under the watchful gazes of the crowd, Stephen shook his head. No, I don't have proof. Like I said, Harry continued, someone like him doesn't have the means to obtain such a valuable antique. He's trying to fool all of us with a knockoff he purchased on the streets, Rebecca added. Their accusations caused a storm among the guests. They broke out in animated discussions. The guest who Kim had scolded earlier deliberately spoke louder than the others. I wonder how prestigious his background was. He's just a nobody. It was only a few minutes ago when he said the snow ginseng wasn't valuable. Now he's bringing counterfeit goods to his family's doorstep and claims it's a gift. If it weren't for Mr. Harry's sharp eyes, we would have fallen into his trap. Angelo was on the verge of exploding. He was Stephen's grandfather, and from the past interactions, he knew his grandson would never lie. DeAndre had intentionally ignored Angelo when he presented his gift. It was clear that the Cassidy family looked down on the Sierra family. Now they were humiliating his own grandson right in front of him. Stephanie was also indignant. She thought there might have been a misunderstanding because their families were in-laws, but this was beyond her expectations. The Cassidy family was treating Stephen like some abandoned child they'd picked up from the streets. Do you have anything to say for yourself? DeAndre asked. Since no one believes me, why don't we call an antique appraiser over to inspect it? Stephen suggested. Harry and Rebecca weren't expecting him to keep up the farce until the end, but he looked much too calm for someone presenting a fake antique. A sudden thought struck them. What if the gift was real? One member of the Cassidy family's younger generation chimed in. That's a waste of time. I doubt it's real. A son-in-law like him would never be able to afford a priceless antique. I bet the money he spent on the gift is from our family. It won't be long until he targets our assets. Many of them looked down on Stephen. They took the opportunity to add insult to injury. The guests' ridicule intensified when they remembered who he was. So he's that son-in-law of the Cassidy family. He's the famous good-for-nothing freeloader husband who relies on women to climb up the ladder. He's worse than the rumors. Angelo and Stephanie were outraged, but it was difficult for them to step in. The Sierra family was a royal family from New York City and had a prestigious status, but they couldn't compare to the Cassidy family. They had surpassed the Addams family and took over the position as ranked first in the country. Harry and Rebecca's doubts vanished after hearing the crowd's criticisms. A good-for-nothing like Stephen could never have found a real antique from a millennia ago. Kim defended Stephen, but one voice couldn't suppress a room filled with hundreds of people who were shouting all at once. Her voice was drowned out in the crowd of noise. Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to say? DeAndre asked. There was no emotion in his tone. An antique appraiser can tell us if it's real or not, Stephen repeated. DeAndre slammed his hand on the table. The hall fell silent. You're Kim's husband, so I'll give you another chance. Do you admit that the gift you gave me is a fake? The crowd watched from the sidelines. The head of the Cassidy family's anger was on full display. This would not end well for Stephen. Grandpa, this really is an antique from 1,000 years ago. It's rare and priceless. Stephen had personally selected this particular ceramic bowl from the palace's vault of treasures. This antique was quite rare, even to the palace. Disappointment crossed DeAndre's face. Do you know how much patience I've had with you? I've given you more than enough chances. But this antique is real, Stephen insisted. How dare you talk back to me? DeAndre shouted. His booming voice startled the crowd. He held in his anger and kept his voice steady as he spoke again. I've seen Junewares before. They're delicate but sturdy. The glaze layer is relatively thin. Some have a splash of color and an opaque design. As for your antique... The crowd shifted their gaze to Stephen's gift. The glaze of the ceramic bowl was heavy. While the patterns were beautiful, it didn't match the characteristics of an authentic Juneware that DeAndre had described. "This isn't your typical Juneware," Stephen explained. "This is one of a kind, and it's one of the best that's ever been crafted." No one spoke as they took in his words. His confidence made the guests want to believe him. Harry broke the silence. "Now that I think about it, I've heard about this antique before. It's a priceless treasure, and there's only one of them at the Cultural Relics Investigation Bureau. If this is a famous antique, then what about the one at the Bureau? Did you steal it?" His accusations were convincing, and the guests' doubts were washed away. They were certain that Stephen was bluffing. I almost fell for it. He makes bold claims without batting an eye. He must have experience. I never imagined the son-in-law of the Cassidy family would steal an antique from the Cultural Relics Investigation Bureau. DeAndre tapped his finger on the table. "Stephen, admit your mistake and I'll let bygones be bygones." Harry and Rebecca grew nervous. The situation had already escalated to this point. They thought DeAndre would have given in by now and announced Stephen's expulsion from the family. It seemed like he favored Kim more than they'd expected. But not all hope was lost. Stephen was stubborn, and they'd never seen him admit he was wrong to anyone except Kim. To their relief, Stephen didn't admit his mistake. "We'll know if it's real or not after we find an antique appraiser." DeAndre had reached the end of his patience. "I've given you many chances, Stephen. First, you abandoned your family for another woman, but I let it go because of Kim. Second, you provoked the Fallon family, but I also let that go because of Wayne. Third, you tried to take credit away from Tyrell when he rescued Valeria. He's a member of the Empyrean Circle, so he couldn't be bothered to call you out. I planned to kick you out of the family at that time, but for Kim's sake, I gave you yet another chance. In the end, you still haven't learned from your mistakes. You claim this is an authentic antique? How could you possibly know more than me?" DeAndre stood up and grabbed the ceramic bowl. He threw it on the floor, and it shattered into pieces. Stephen was momentarily stunned. No matter how worked up DeAndre was, he didn't think he would break the priceless antique in front of a crowd. Helen also stood up and slapped Stephen across the face. "Our family has no need for people like you. From today onwards, you will be expelled from our family. You're no longer affiliated with us." Kim's expression darkened. She stepped in front of Stephen and glared daggers at Helen and DeAndre. "Stephen didn't do anything to deserve this kind of treatment. How do you know for sure the antique isn't fake if you didn't consult an expert?" "Kim, it's fine," Stephen said quietly. He pulled her behind him and fixed Helen and DeAndre with a look so cold they felt a chill run down their spine. "You're Kim's family, so I'll let this go. But if you provoke me again, you'll regret it." Stephen's aura flooded the hall. The pressure bore down on the crowd, rendering them speechless. He turned to face Kim, who was carrying Valeria in her arms. "Let's go. From now on, the Cassidy family has nothing to do with us." Angelo had been fuming in his seat. Back then, he was forced to watch his daughter, Victoria, be taken away from him. This time, he couldn't sit still and do nothing while his grandson was being mistreated by his in-laws. The Sierra family couldn't be compared to the Cassidy family, but he would take the responsibility for any consequences that followed. Angelo made up his mind and decisively stormed towards the front of the hall. He pulled Stephen away from the platform. "We're leaving. Why should we attend a stranger's celebration?" Stephanie ushered Kim and Valeria along. Stephen was surprised that Angelo was standing up for him. He'd agreed to include his name in the Sierra family's ancestry, but that was only to make Victoria happy. He never thought of Angelo as his grandfather after everything that had happened between them. Angelo was taking a huge risk for him by offending the Cassidy family. This was the first time Stephen had ever thought about acknowledging him as his grandfather and starting over. DeAndre felt like his authority was being challenged. "When did I say you could leave?" Stephen didn't look back. "Don't worry about him. Let's go." He'd been tolerating the Cassidy family for years because of Kim, but he knew they harassed her just as much as they did him. Kim had predicted that there would be a conflict during the celebration, but she didn't know it would be so serious. Maybe it was for the best that they'd finally been kicked out of the family. "Where do you think you're going?" Rebecca called after them. "You should be begging Grandpa to spare you," Harry threatened. DeAndre glanced at Joshua, who'd been quietly watching the commotion unfold. "Joshua, teach him a lesson. Don't kill him, just break his limbs and throw him out." The guests started whispering. Things aren't looking too good for Kim's family. That aristocrat is making his move. I've heard their martial arts are out of this world. Joshua hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea." He was only here to host the celebration and complete Wayne's mission. He wasn't planning to beat anyone up. After a mysterious martial artist unified the aristocratic families, an additional rule had been implemented. When the aristocrats ventured outside of their territories, they were not allowed to casually harm the lives of outsiders. DeAndre glared at him. "I'll take responsibility. Just do as I say." Joshua was reluctant, but he had no choice but to agree. The crowd continued to whisper. "He's coming. Never seen an aristocrat in action before. I wonder how strong he is." "Stephen's done for." Angelo came forward. "You'll have to get past me first." Joshua sighed. "I'm sorry, sir, but I've taken on this mission, so I have to follow my employer's orders. You're close to the Grandmaster realm, but you're not there yet. I suggest you stay out of this." "If you know that, shouldn't you be the one backing down?" Angelo asked. "It's been years since I became a Grandmaster. I'm at the peak of the realm, and I'm almost a martial Grandmaster. If you don't want to be injured unnecessarily, then withdraw." Angelo was surprised. Grandmasters weren't that common. Joshua was young, but his martial arts had far surpassed his own. Stephen's aura surged as he stepped in front of Angelo. "It's fine, Grandpa. Leave this to me. Help me take care of Kim and Valeria. He's just a Grandmaster. I've dealt with martial artists like him more times than I can count." "You're making a big mistake," Joshua said. "You're no match for me." Stephen shrugged. "How would you know if we haven't fought yet?" Without another word, Joshua closed the distance in a flash and swung his fist, aiming for Stephen's right shoulder. Angelo, Stephanie, Kim, and the guests cried out in alarm, but for different reasons. The three of them were concerned for Stephen, while the guests were worried about the gruesome scene they were about to witness. Joshua's confident expression turned into confusion when his fist reached Stephen. He didn't feel the sensation of hitting flesh. It was like he'd passed through an illusion. When Stephen's figure dissipated, he realized that it was an afterimage. "Are you looking for me?" Stephen's voice echoed in the hall, and for a second, Joshua couldn't pinpoint his location. He noticed the crowd staring behind him with shocked expressions and whirled around. But it was too late. A fist slammed into his face, causing him to stagger back. The guests were dumbfounded. How did a good-for-nothing freeloader land a hit on a member of the Fallon family? He forced a Grandmaster to take a step back. What unorthodox method is he using? Joshua wiped the blood from his nose, seething that some outsider had caught him off guard with his tricks and punched him in the face. He remembered what Stephen had said before they exchanged blows. He'd claimed that he'd faced many Grandmasters before. What if that was true? The moment this thought crossed his mind, Joshua waved it away. He was a member of an aristocratic family, and the outsiders could never match up to them. He reasoned that Stephen had gotten a lucky hit on him. Joshua unleashed his aura. His inner energy took the form of rays of light and swirled around him. An outsider relying on tricks in a fight. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. The guests were suspecting that Joshua wasn't actually a Grandmaster when Stephen caught him off guard, but the pressure from his aura was unmistakable. To outsiders, reaching the Grandmaster realm was the limit for martial artists. Stephen had somehow landed a hit on Joshua, but his loss was already predetermined. The guests began to criticize him again. Stephen's strong, but unfortunately, he can't win against Joshua. He deserves it. He gave Mr. DeAndre a knockoff for his birthday. Who wouldn't get angry? He's done so many shameless things in the past, and Mr. DeAndre let him off every time. He needs to be taught a lesson. Kim was disgusted by the guests' change in attitude. Many of them had lowered their heads in front of her to obtain a business partnership with Skyreach Corporation, but it didn't take much to make them stand on the opposite side. Angela was also looking at the crowd disdainfully. As a royal family, the Sierra family was regarded as one of the most influential forces to the upper class of California. Stephen's connection with the Sierra family was widely spread. Under normal circumstances, these guests wouldn't have had the courage to ridicule him when the Sierra family was present. But because the Cassidy family was around, they weren't intimidated. Joshua had spent most of his life in seclusion, and this had continued even after the aristocratic families annulled the covenant. This was his first time experiencing the support of a crowd. He was beginning to understand why so many of the aristocrats liked mingling with outsiders. "Stephen, you've been with the Cassidy family for many years. There's no need for us to fight. How about this? If you take one hit from me, I'll consider this matter settled. Then we'll go our separate ways. You and the Cassidy family won't have anything to do with each other anymore." Rebecca looked at Harry in a panic, only to find that he was also looking at her. They were thinking the same thing. Even if Stephen accepted the deal, Joshua wouldn't go so far as to mutilate or kill him. As long as Stephen was around, they would never be able to take Kim's company. Harry and Rebecca spoke up at the same time. "Mr. Joshua, we can't let Stephen go. If you don't teach him a good lesson today, he'll come back for revenge." "My brother's right. Stephen is narrow-minded and petty. If you let him walk out of this house, he'll start spreading rumors and discredit the Fallon family." Joshua glanced at them in displeasure. "Are you telling me what to do?" Harry and Rebecca were intimidated and shrank back. DeAndre intervened to end the conflict. "Harry, Rebecca, don't be rude. Apologize to Joshua." The two of them mumbled an apology, which Joshua accepted. He wasn't thrilled that he was being forced to break the rules, but because DeAndre was Wayne's uncle and the elder of the family, there was a certain level of etiquette he had to maintain with the Cassidy family. Joshua turned back to Stephen. "I'm sure you're a smart man, so you should know how to judge the situation." Stephen put his hands in his pockets. "Are you done talking?" "I'm a Grand Master," Joshua emphasized. "I know, so what?" Joshua frowned. He'd been planning to spare Stephen after giving him a light punch in the face, but he never thought he'd be so grateful and ignore his good intentions. The guest chimed in. "Mr. Joshua's being lenient with you. He's overlooking your disrespectful attitude. Can't you tell he's giving you a way out? If you want to die so badly, then go ahead. You only have yourself to blame." On the other hand, Helen was considering a terrifying possibility. What if Stephen had recovered his martial arts? The Cassidy family had encountered Stephen's claims when he'd dealt with numerous grandmasters before because they knew it was true. While they were aware that he used to be the former commander, that didn't seem to be the case for the guests or Joshua. However, they didn't think it was a big deal. The world-renowned doctor, Lionel Sloan, had stated that even though the former commander had recovered from his disability, he'd lost his martial arts abilities. He was no different from an ordinary person. For the past few years, the Fallon family hadn't paid too much attention to him, because they weren't interested in outsiders, especially not a commander who'd fallen from glory. As time passed, Stephen's history was gradually forgotten. This was his first high-profile appearance in a long time, and his confidence made Helen feel somewhat uneasy. She whispered to DeAndre, "Do you think Stephen recovered his martial arts?" DeAndre thought about it. The aristocratic families had no shortage of Grand Masters. Joshua was one of them, and he was ranked at the bottom of the Fallon family. If Stephen really did regain his martial arts, today would not end well. "That's impossible. Dr. Sloan confirmed that Stephen would never recover his martial arts. He's a skilled doctor. He wouldn't make a mistake in his diagnosis. You're overthinking it." Truthfully, DeAndre wasn't sure, but he hoped Helen's concerns were false. Helen was relieved. "I was worried about what he would do to our family if he really was as strong as before." DeAndre leaned back against the chair. "Either way, I don't think there's anything to worry about. He couldn't even defeat Kylan, and had his commander position taken away. Kylan's just an average martial artist among the aristocratic families.
Even if Stephen somehow recovered his martial arts, he wouldn't dare to make a scene, because he knows he wouldn't stand a chance against the aristocrats. As DeAndre spoke, he regretted his impulsive actions. He shouldn't have kicked Stephen out of the family so suddenly, but it wasn't as if he could take back his words. He was the head of the family, and he had a reputation to maintain. Stephen had been expelled from the Cassidy family, and that was that. Meanwhile, Joshua and Stephen's verbal battle was coming to an end. "Don't blame me for not going easy on you," Joshua threatened. "So what are you going to do?" Stephen asked, unbothered. He had intentionally left an afterimage behind, and he'd even forced Joshua back with one punch to the face. The difference between them was obvious. Joshua should have realized by now that he was at a disadvantage, but instead, he thought Stephen was messing around and that the whole thing had been a fluke. There must be something wrong with his brain. The Cassidy family had crossed the line today, and Stephen was planning to teach them a lesson. Of course, they were Kim's family, so he wouldn't go too far when the time came. As for Joshua, he was a member of the Fallon family. He had violated the rules, but that was because DeAndre hadn't given him a choice. Stephen was the aristocrats' leader, so technically Joshua was his subordinate. He didn't want to beat him too hard when it wasn't his faults. Stephen had tried to give Joshua a hint of his identity by showing him his martial arts, but unfortunately, he hadn't caught on. Joshua took a step forward and vanished, reappearing in front of Stephen with his fist raised. From the guest's perspective, Joshua's movements were instantaneous. He'd closed the distance with a single step. They were impressed with his speed. But in Stephen's perspective, Joshua couldn't have been any more slower. His eyesight was better than most people, and it was like watching a movie in slow motion. Stephen kept his hands in his pockets as he watched Joshua's movements from beginning to end. He saw the curve of his back and the way he dug his heel into the floor as he prepared to lunge. He could sense Joshua's inner energy gathering in his legs to propel him forward. Stephen slightly leaned to the side to avoid his fist. To the guests, it looked like he'd barely managed to dodge Joshua's attack. Leaving one hand in his pocket, Stephen reached out with the other and grabbed Joshua's head, slamming him into the floor face first. The guests held their breaths at the unbelievable scene. Some of them thought they were seeing things. When they blinked, the same scene stared back at them. The expensive, smooth, and mirror-like tiles were covered in cracks. And Joshua was lying on the floor. Only a few minutes had passed since they mocked Stephen for choosing to be beaten black and blue, and it was Joshua who ended up losing. Stephen had defeated a grandmaster, and his martial arts won the hearts of the guests. A round of applause came from the platform. It was DeAndre. The guests wondered if he'd lost his mind. "Stephen, I didn't know you recovered your martial arts, but even if you are the former commander, you're no match for the aristocratic families. Apologize to Joshua, and I'll let you stay in the Cassidy family." At first, Helen didn't know why DeAndre was making this offer, but then she understood. Without his martial arts, Stephen had no value or status. Now that he'd recovered, he was on par with an ordinary member of the aristocratic families. No one would look down on a martial artist who'd reached the Grandmaster realm. It'd be a waste for a talent like Stephen to be cast out of the family. DeAndre had expelled Stephen in front of the guests, and the only way to bring him back was to offer a compromise. Harry and Rebecca were at a loss. Their plan was on the verge of failing. They prayed for Stephen to refuse. The guests had just recovered from their shock at Joshua's defeat when they received another surprise. Stephen, the good-for-nothing freeloader, was the former commander. He was the same commander who'd led the country to victory in the war against the Alliance and protected the peace for years. After Kylan became the new commander, the people had gradually forgotten about the former commander's achievements. But there were still quite a few people who remembered him. Many of those people were here as guests. The former commander's contributions flashed through their minds. They finally understood why Stephen had been so confident. What was there to be afraid of when he'd retained his martial arts? At the same time, the guests were astonished by the Cassidy family's foundation. If even a random son-in-law of the family had such an illustrious identity, then what about their core members? If Stephen accepted DeAndre's proposal, the Cassidy family would once again have the former commander on their side. Along with the Fallon family, they'd be invincible. To the guests, Stephen's answer had already been set in stone, and they could predict the Cassidy family's prosperity for years to come. Although Stephen was the former commander, his past identity was only worth something to the aristocratic families. He may be a skilled martial artist, but he was only one person. He wouldn't stand a chance if the aristocrats banded together. Even the Leviathan unit had to be careful. Not to mention, his wife was from the Cassidy family. Accepting DeAndre's proposal was the only logical path for Stephen to take. The guest tried to urge him to give DeAndre an answer. "Mr. Adams, your grandfather-in-law made an error in judgment in a fit of anger. Don't hold it against him. You can't afford to go against the aristocratic families. If you pledge allegiance to the Cassidy family, they'll overlook your disrespectful behavior. Hurry and apologize." Angelo interrupted before Stephen could respond. "DeAndre, did you forget what you said just now? You asked Joshua to break Stephen's limbs and throw him out. Now that he's demonstrated his martial arts, you want to recruit him back into your family? Do you have no sense of shame? If it weren't for what happened today, I wouldn't have known that my own grandson was being treated this badly by his in-laws. You want him to apologize? Why don't you take a good look at yourself in the mirror first? Do you even have a conscience?" The guests wanted to defend DeAndre, but they held their tongue. Angelo was a member of the Sierra family. They could lash out as much as they wanted with the Cassidy family's assistance, but they were on their own once they returned home. DeAndre was embarrassed by the accusations, but without Joshua, he had to rein in his anger before putting Angelo in his place. "This is none of the Sierra family's business. It's not your place to interfere." Stephen ignored the ongoing argument and looked at Kim. "What do you think, Kim? I'll let you make the decision. I'll go along with whatever you choose." No one had expected Stephen to leave such an important decision up to his wife. Whichever path she chose could result in serious consequences. The Cassidy family was currently ranked first in the country. Because of their status, they had many allies. At the same time, Stephen had attacked a member of the Fallon family. Neither family would let him off so easily. Even if he used to be the divine weapon of the nation, it was a distant memory of the past. If Stephen gave in, there was still a chance for him to turn things around. The Cassidy family would have a talented martial artist on their side, and with their affiliation to the Fallon family, the aristocrats would overlook his conflict with Joshua. In addition, his status in the family would rise. He would no longer be known as a freeloader. This was a win-win situation for everyone. Angelo and Stephanie had nothing against Kim, but like the guests, they considered Stephen giving her the choice a sign of submission. She was from the Cassidy family, and above all else, blood was thicker than water. No matter how dissatisfied Kim was with them, she would always be their family. Moreover, Kim was in charge of Skyreach Corporation, a leading enterprise. As someone who was used to being in a position of prominence, wealth, and authority, would she pick her husband, who had nothing going for him, or the Cassidy family, who was ranked first in the country? The answer was obvious. Helen and DeAndre were anticipating Kim's decision. Before DeAndre returned, Helen was the matriarch of the family, and she held the most power. She knew her granddaughter better than anyone. To members of upper-class families, blood relations were a priority, and Kim was no exception. She would be upset and hesitate, but she would end up agreeing. DeAndre thought Stephen had given in. He didn't want to make a fool of himself, so he'd passed the responsibility to his wife. Kim was DeAndre's beloved granddaughter, and she held a high position in the Fallon family. With a high status and two prestigious families, who would give up that kind of power? While Helen and DeAndre were envisioning a bright future, Harry and Rebecca's minds were racing, trying to come up with a way to salvage their plan. Things had spiraled out of their control, and they couldn't accept this outcome. They had spent so much effort to make Kim give up her business, but it would all be in vain if she let Stephen back into the family. After demonstrating his outstanding martial arts, his value and status in the family would rise once he became one of them again. Not only would Harry and Rebecca lose the chance to take over Kim's business, but there was also a risk of her and Stephen getting back at them for what they've done. "Grandpa, we can't overlook Stephen's disrespect," Harry said anxiously. "He injured Mr. Joshua and looked down on the Cassidy family," Rebecca added. He gave you a fake antique and ruined your birthday celebration. In their rush to salvage their plan, they'd overlooked DeAndre's purpose of recruiting Stephen back into the family. His booming voice echoed in the hall. Be quiet! His intimidating gaze swept over Harry and Rebecca, making them tremble and cower. Since when did I need you two to teach me how to manage my family? DeAndre was the head of the Cassidy family, and he had the final say. The rest of the family could give their input, but the ultimate decision was in his hands. He'd already decided to bring Stephen back into the family, and no one could stop him. Harry and Rebecca were reluctant, but they could only swallow their complaints. A Cassidy family member with high status stepped forward to try to persuade DeAndre to change his mind. Grandpa, they were just considering what's best for our family. What was that? DeAndre snapped. Are you trying to say that I don't have the family's best interest in mind? The family member was so scared that he hurriedly apologized and retreated to the side. If there's a next time, then don't even think about staying in this family. DeAndre turned his attention back to the center of the hall. Have you made your decision? My patience is limited. Tell me your answer. Kim handed Valeria to Stephanie and walked up to Stephen. She looked into his eyes. He met her searching gaze. He'd never seen her so serious before. Neither of them said a word. Their stare-down continued for several minutes. Eventually, Stephen broke eye contact. He touched the back of his neck sheepishly. What's the matter, Kim? Stephen, tell me honestly. What else are you hiding from me? Nothing much. If you really want to know, I'll tell you when we get home. I kept it to myself because I didn't want you or Valeria to worry. Kim nodded. All right, don't forget what you said. She reached out and caressed his cheek. Does it hurt? He leaned into her touch. No. Kim sighed. He was always hiding his pain from her. She held Stephen's hand and led him to the bottom of the platform. She looked up at DeAndre. I'm sorry, Grandpa. Our family has been mistreating Stephen for years. I don't want this to happen again. But Stephen won't be leaving because he was expelled. He and I are leaving together out of our own free will. Tension filled the hall. The whispers in the crowd died down. No one had expected Kim to make this decision. Stephen was the only one in the hall who wasn't surprised. It was time to leave the Cassidy family, and he knew that Kim felt the same way. Just like how she believed in him, he also believed in her. Unexpectedly, it was Helen who reacted first. She pointed a trembling finger at Kim and Stephen. You two are betraying your own family. DeAndre couldn't hide his emotions anymore. Holding his hands behind his back, he stood up and stared down at Kim and Stephen. Disappointment shone in his eyes. Kim, as my granddaughter, I thought you would make the right choice. For your sake, I won't pursue this issue. Take Stephen with you and leave. From now on, your family will no longer have any connection with us. DeAndre's voice was resigned. Out of all of his grandchildren, Kim held a special place in his heart. Cutting ties with their family made his heart ache. But as the head of the family, this was something he had to do with so many witnesses present. Otherwise, their family's prestige they'd painstakingly taken decades to establish would go to waste. Between the Cassidy family and his granddaughter, he had to make the best choice for his people as a whole. Even though Kim had left the family, DeAndre wasn't worried about her. She still held a high position in the Fallon family. Her enemies would have to think twice before provoking her. As for Stephen, he had made an enemy out of the aristocratic families. They would do everything in their power to hunt him down. At the thought of Stephen, DeAndre couldn't help but sigh. If he'd known that Stephen had recovered his martial arts, he wouldn't have kicked him out. Martial artists were considered a great asset, and they were valued everywhere. But while that was true, Stephen's reckless behavior posed a risk to their family. He made enemies wherever he went. Sooner or later, his actions would come back to bite him. If there was still one of them when the time came, their entire family might be annihilated overnight. It was a shame to lose out on Stephen's martial arts, but when considering the family's future, it was a good idea to expel him. As this thought crossed DeAndre's mind, his disappointment lessened. The guests were frozen in shock. The situation had been reversed 3 times. Harry, Rebecca, and the rest of the family were elated. Not only had Stephen been expelled, but Kim was leaving with him. This was the best outcome they could have hoped for. If Kim wasn't part of the Cassidy family anymore, then Skyreach Corporation didn't belong to her. Harry and Rebecca were quick-witted and wasted no time to try to get Helen's attention. At the center of the hall, Stephen took Valeria from Stephanie. He carried her with one arm and held Kim's hand. "Let's go." Everyone nodded. Even Valeria, who didn't quite understand what had happened, nodded along with the adults. As they turned to leave, Helen's voice called them back. "You can leave, Kim, but did you forget about Skyreach Corporation? It's our family's property. You're not one of us anymore. Please transfer ownership of the company to us." The guests who weren't aware of Kim's identity were stunned. The seemingly unfavored daughter of the Cassidy family was a tycoon. Skyreach Corporation monopolized 80% of the cash flow in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding states. Her assets grew by tens of billions every day, and she was more influential than most of the guests present. The few guests who had mocked Kim earlier only had one thought at the moment, and that was, "I'm finished." They defended someone they couldn't afford to offend. At first, when Stephen's identity as the former commander was revealed, they thought their family was relying on the past status to act pretentiously. But it turned out that both husband and wife were influential figures in the country. Given their prominent identities, even the Cassidy family wouldn't have the authority to make Kim hand over her business. Helen had prepared for the guests' confusion, so she wasn't concerned. "Kim, if you want to leave, transfer ownership of Skyreach Corporation to our family." Kim turned around and shot Helen a warning look. "Stephen founded Skyreach Corporation and gave me management rights. The Cassidy family was not involved whatsoever. Don't you think asking for the company is going overboard?" Helen maintained her composure. "Without our family's support, how could you have merged the Wyvern Group and Tanith Corporation into Skyreach Corporation? It was only possible because of us. When you were a member of our family, we let you keep ownership of the company. Now that your family's been expelled, it's only right for us to take back what's ours." The Cassidy family was quick to support Helen. If they won the guests' approval with a lie, Kim would be forced to hand over her business. "Grandma has a point. The company doesn't belong to you. The merger happened with the Cassidy family's support. It hasn't been yours for a long time. How ungrateful can you be? We're doing this for your own good. We want to help you manage the company." The guests weren't expecting this twist. The Cassidy family had helped Kim build her business. If they took back the company, their influence would be doubled. Each guest had given DeAndre a gift to prove their loyalty. As the Cassidy family's subordinates, the family's success was equivalent to their own success. Several of them started shouting their support for Helen. Just then, an unfamiliar voice reverberated around the hall, interrupting their argument. "Looks like we came at the wrong time." 3 people donning black robes appeared at the entrance of the hall. They were carrying 3 suitcases. The quarrel stopped in an instant. A wave of unease swept through the hall. Everyone was too afraid to make a sound. DeAndre eyed the new arrivals suspiciously. "Who are you?" The man in the lead threw a suitcase across the hall. It crashed into the table next to DeAndre. Some of the gifts from the guests fell to the floor. "I'm no one special. I'm here to wish you a happy birthday." It was disrespectful for newcomers to show up at a celebration without an invitation. Harry took the lead and reprimanded the 3 men clad in black. DeAndre wasn't happy with him after his previous remark, so Harry wanted to win his favor back. "Sneaking into a party is largely inappropriate." Rebecca didn't want to be outdone. "Our family doesn't welcome strangers. Please tell us your names." Many of the guests joined in. They each held high positions in California, and they'd had to pay a huge price to qualify as a guest. They couldn't accept these 3 random people sneaking around and crashing the celebration. "If you want to participate, then present your gift. Without a suitable gift, you don't meet the qualifications to join us." The man in the lead said nothing, but from the way his shoulders were shaking, it was obvious that he was resisting the urge to laugh out loud. The other 2 behind him didn't bother holding it in. They burst out laughing. Their laughter was deafening. They weren't using any devices to amplify their voices, but it sounded like thunder when it resounded across the hall. Everyone looked around, searching for the source of the laughter. The two men were standing right there at the entrance, but their voices sounded like they were coming from every direction. A normal person wouldn't be capable of this. DeAndre had come to the same conclusion. He couldn't sense their auras, which could only mean that they were skilled enough to erase their presence completely. The man in the lead walked up to the guests. His hand shot out and grabbed the throat of a guest who'd mocked him in the beginning. The guest struggled to break from his hold, but the man's grip was like iron. His father demanded for the man to let go of his son, but he spoke from where he stood. He was too afraid to get any closer. The rest of the family also started shouting from the sidelines. The man who had grabbed the guest's neck was so fast that most of the people in the hall hadn't seen anything except for a blur. Using force to pry the man's hand away from the guest's neck was a death sentence. "Stop chattering," the man said without sparing them a glance. He tightened his grip, and a crisp sound echoed in the hall. Everyone was in disbelief. The man had killed someone in front of numerous witnesses. "What do you think?" the man said. "Was that entertaining enough for you?" He tossed the body onto the floor and kicked him. The body burst into blood and flesh when it collided against the wall. The guests were horrified. None of them had ever imagined such an atrocity being committed in broad daylight in a society governed by the law. Amidst the panic, one guest kept her rationality and yelled, "He's a murderer! Call the police!" DeAndre was already displeased with Stephen's antics. With an uninvited guest crashing the party, he'd lost all face. "Sir, are you aware of the laws that run this country? With so many witnesses, it'll be difficult for you to talk your way out of this." "I told you, we're here to celebrate your birthday," the man repeated. "Why don't you open the suitcase and take a look?" He casually walked up to the platform and sat on one of the empty seats. The other two men stood behind him. The three of them seemed to mind the stares from the crowd. "You're not welcome here," DeAndre said, standing up. "Someone, please see him out." He noticed something was amiss when no one replied. After the Cassidy family rose to fame, bodyguards were a must. With Helen's permission, Harry had hired a group of elite bodyguards. When none of them showed up, the silence inside and outside the hall became much more apparent. Their residence was located in a busy neighborhood, and it was rare for the streets to be this quiet at this time of day. A sudden sound caught everyone's attention. It came from the suitcase that the man had tossed onto the platform. It wasn't sealed that tightly, and it was bulging from whatever was packed inside. When DeAndre stood up, he'd accidentally knocked the suitcase over and loosened the buckle. The suitcase flipped open, and its contents spilled out. Helen clasped her hands over her mouth. There was someone inside the suitcase whom the guests were very familiar with. It was the mayor of Los Angeles. To be more precise, his head was the only part of him that was left. The other two men tossed their respective suitcases onto the floor, revealing their other victims. The guest recognized the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department and the leader of a prominent family. Each and every single head inside the suitcases belonged to an influential figure in California. A chill ran down everyone's spines, including DeAndre's. Terror enveloped the Cassidy family and the guests. The only sound left in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. The man in the lead was satisfied with their reactions. He clapped his hands. "Mr. DeAndre and everyone else, are you satisfied with my gift?" His calm tone contrasted their horror. After a long pause, DeAndre got a hold of himself and repeated his question from earlier. "Who are you?" He had a sliver of confidence remaining. After all, he was an aristocrat, and he was the head of the Fallon family's uncle. The three men's victims held important positions in the state, but they all had been outsiders. Their bodyguards couldn't have been anyone special. But the Fallon family was different. They were ranked in the top 10 aristocratic families, and they had no shortage of talented martial artists. The three men were skilled in martial arts, but even they would have to be careful when dealing with an aristocrat. "Who I am isn't important," the man replied. "What is important is your decision. Submit or die. Which will it be?" DeAndre frowned. Your request is crossing the line. He would not allow the influential guests from California to submit to 3 outsiders with unknown identities. With DeAndre taking the lead, the other guests gathered their courage and stood their ground. The Haynes family will never submit to you. The Cassidy family is the only family in California with the qualifications to unite us. You aren't qualified. Stephen didn't think the situation was as simple as the Cassidy family and the guests made it seem. The 3 men were skilled martial artists. If they were compared to the aristocratic families, they would be ranked among the top members. It would be dangerous for the Cassidy family to go against them. Stephen recalled that the prisoners who'd been detained in the 7 Stars prison had broken out recently. Many of them were scattered across the country. Putting 2 and 2 together, he speculated that these 3 men were prisoners who'd escaped. During the commotion, Stephen had secretly sent a signal to the palace's guards, who'd been left in charge of protecting his family. He couldn't be bothered to personally resolve their predicament. Their issues had nothing to do with him. He took advantage of the chaos and motioned for Angelo, Stephanie, Kim, and Valeria to leave. Let's go. This has nothing to do with us. Kim wasn't a member of the Cassidy family anymore, but she was somewhat worried about them. The 3 men were aggressive and didn't hesitate to kill off one of the guests. Stephen... She didn't finish her sentence, but Angelo and Stephanie had interacted with her and Stephen enough to know what they were like. Stephen was rushing them out of the hall because things were about to get dangerous. As for Kim, despite everything that the Cassidy family had done to her, they were related by blood. She couldn't just watch her entire family get killed off. Angelo scoffed. They don't deserve your concern. They've been mistreating Stephen for years, and they even got him kicked out of the family in public. They got themselves into this mess, so it's up to them to get out of it. Meanwhile, the man in the lead was laughing at DeAndre's remark. Not qualified, you say? Do you have a different opinion? DeAndre asked. He didn't think these 3 men were capable of going against the aristocratic families, but with the subordinate he had on hand, it wouldn't be easy to hold them back. DeAndre had already signaled to his subordinate to report this to the police and contact the Fallon family for assistance. Before they arrived, he had to stall for time. Ordinary people are as stupid as the rumors make them out to be, the man standing in the back said. We're not here for a debate. We're in charge, and we make the rules. The guests were infuriated. Who here wasn't at the top of the ladder? The man's demands were an insult to all of them. They were terrified when the 3 men first appeared with suitcases with bloody heads, but after recovering from their shock, anger had settled in. DeAndre was also not pleased. Today was his birthday, and these 3 men had ruined the celebration. It was a blatant provocation. You wouldn't dare. Why wouldn't we? The man in the lead kicked the table next to DeAndre. Priceless treasures shattered on the floor, becoming a pile of trash with the ceramic bowl from Stephen. The guests' stomachs sank. The effort and wealth they'd put into their gift to win the Cassidy family's favor were on that table. Now that the table had carried 30% of California's wealth had been unceremoniously overturned, anger was unavoidable. You're a coward who doesn't have the courage to reveal your identity, DeAndre yelled. I'll make you regret ever setting foot inside my house. The second he finished his sentence, a group of people appeared in the middle of the hall. A young man and a young woman wearing a veil were in the lead. The young man, Darian Chevalier, spoke first. There's actually someone brave enough to provoke our aristocratic families. He must have a death wish. DeAndre had arranged for his subordinate to notify the head of the Fallon family, Wayne. He'd sensed the reinforcements from the aristocratic families when they entered the vicinity of their mansion. That was why he'd been so fearless. DeAndre didn't put on airs. He treated the reinforcements as if they were on the same level. You're just in time. These people have committed heinous crimes. They killed one of my guests and countless others from California. Please put them in their place. Don't worry, Darian said. We'll take care of this. DeAndre nodded and faced the guests. Everyone, these people are members of aristocratic families. They'll bring these 3 criminals to justice. With his announcement, the guests found their backbone and voiced their grievances. The father of the son who'd been killed wiped the tears from his eyes. They killed my son. Please avenge him. Another guest said, "They broke my gift I spent all my savings on." Someone else added, "They lopped off people's heads and stuffed them in suitcases. They even flipped the table." The complaints came one after another. The young woman with the veil, Tori Everett, was annoyed by the ruckus. Just when she was about to say something, Darian cut her off and silenced the crowd. "Be quiet. We're here to provide backup, not to listen to your complaints. If you say another word, we'll throw you out." He was intimidating, and the guests quieted down. The reinforcements scanned their surroundings and began to chat amongst themselves, while the three men in black continued their conversation with DeAndre. "Are these your reinforcements?" the man in the lead asked. DeAndre was full of confidence and replied rudely, "It's good that you know. This is it for you three." Meanwhile, Tori was looking around in confusion. "Where's Joshua? I heard he was hosting the celebration. Is he not here?" Tori speculated that it was Joshua's negligence which had caused this mess. When she questioned where he was, the Cassidy family and the guests turned towards the center of the hall. The reinforcements followed their gazes. A young man was lying down, face on the floor. They had noticed him when they first arrived, but they'd ignored his presence because they didn't think it was Joshua. He was ranked at the bottom of the Fallon family, but an outsider was no match for an aristocrat. DeAndre noticed the doubts on their faces. He awkwardly confirmed, "The man on the floor is Joshua." The reinforcements were dumbfounded. Their next thought was that the three men in black robes had to be the culprit. "So Joshua didn't abandon his post," Darian said. "You three attacked him. He's one of us. Harming him is the same as provoking all the aristocratic families. If you think you can match up to us just because you defeated him, you're sorely mistaken." Now it was everyone else's turn to be dumbfounded, including the three men. They didn't come here expecting to bear such a huge responsibility. They hadn't even noticed the man on the floor. The Cassidy family and the guests were also stunned. The three men had no relationship whatsoever to Joshua. DeAndre was feeling incredibly awkward. "I apologize for not being clear. It wasn't them who attacked Joshua. It was Stephen." Darian was ashamed when he jumped to the wrong conclusion in front of a crowd. He felt like he'd been played for a fool, and he urgently needed to reestablish his authority. "Stephen? Who's that? Where is he?" DeAndre gestured to Stephen, who was about to leave with his family. "That's him." As Darian turned around and looked in the direction he was pointing, he said, "An outsider attacking a member of an aristocratic family is a serious crime. He needs to take responsibility and suffer the consequences." He trailed off the instant he saw Stephen's face. He started panicking. "What's wrong, Darian?" The other reinforcements looked over and also began to panic. It was him, the leader of the aristocrats. Unlike DeAndre and Joshua, the reinforcements were aware of Stephen's identity. They'd seen him in person before. Their rank in their respective families was considerably high, and they had participated in the hunt for Stephen back when they misunderstood that he was killing off their family members. It had ended in a crushing defeat, and none of them had forgotten Stephen's terrifying martial arts. Joshua had been a fool to provoke him. The reinforcements berated themselves for their carelessness. They'd unknowingly ignored their leader's presence in the hall. Some of them prepared to get down on one knee. DeAndre noticed that something was off. "Is something the matter?" With the reinforcements' arrival, he believed that the situation had been stabilized. It wouldn't be a problem for them to beat Stephen up first before dealing with the three men. Stephen glanced back when he heard his name being mentioned. The reinforcements from the aristocratic families were staring at him. He didn't recognize them, but they seemed to know who he was. He shook his head slightly. A heavy burden was lifted off the reinforcements' shoulders. They changed their stance and shirked their responsibilities. Joshua lost against an outsider because his martial arts are lacking. Why should I avenge him? Exactly. He's already 20, but he's only a grandmaster. Isn't he ashamed of himself? We should deal with the real problem at hand. This is the Fallon family's internal matter. Why should we interfere? They gave up on Joshua. It was never a good idea to offend someone with a higher rank and status, but to offend the leader of the aristocrats? That was a grave mistake. The Cassidy family and the guests were bewildered by their sudden change in attitude. They couldn't understand why the reinforcements had given up on Stephen after seeing his face. Before they could react, the black-robed man in the lead laughed. I thought you were going to show me something entertaining. If you're too scared to beat him up, then so be it. Messing around with weaklings is pointless. As for you five... He pointed his finger at Stephen and his family. When did I say you could leave? The reinforcements were enraged, especially Darian. He was already annoyed, and the man's provocation was the last straw. What are you talking about? Tori demanded. She was normally well-mannered and rarely raised her voice, but this man was getting on her nerves. Their group consisted of elite martial artists ranked on the top of their respective families. If the Sovereign or the Empyrean Circle weren't around, they would sweep the country if left unchecked. Darian, don't hold back, Tori said. Beat them up. Darian grinned. I don't like you, Tori, but I do like what you're saying. He took a step forward, and cracks appeared on the floor. He instantly crossed the empty space, flashed in front of the man, and threw a punch at his head. Tori was always looking down on him. If he defeated these three men when their leader was present, that would leave a good impression on him and show her up. With this thought in mind, Darian increased the force in his fist. Not bad. The man in the lead calmly sat back in his chair and threw out his palm, meeting Darian's fist directly. Darian's confident expression changed. His fist felt like mud falling into the sea and disappearing without a trace. The man's palm wasn't shaken in the slightest. Just as Darian was about to pull back, the man grabbed his fist and threw him off the platform. The cracks on the floor fragmented and spread further. Is that it? The man asked in disappointment. I thought the aristocrats were stronger than this. With your level of martial arts, you'll never stand a chance against me alone. All of you, attack me together. The guests' chatter ceased, and the hall fell silent. DeAndre couldn't believe his eyes. The Chevalier family had high hopes for Darian, but the man only needed one move to take him down. This was a serious blow to the Chevalier family's reputation. Darian scrambled to his feet in a miserable state. He'd lost before he even had the chance to show his skills. The guests resumed their chattering. I don't think the aristocrat used his full strength. He underestimated his opponent and went easy on him. That man probably knew that and intentionally caught him off guard. He's indeed a shameless villain hiding in the shadows. That man is in for it now. Tori thought otherwise. The Everett family and the Chevalier family were old rivals, so she understood better than anyone how strong Darian actually was. He may have underestimated his opponent, but he did use his full strength. The man would have been defeated in one move if he was weaker than Darian. Before Tori could stop him, Darian had already leaped into action again. He lunged for the man with an explosive fist. Those near the platform jumped out of their seats and retreated to the corner, worried that they'd be swept up into the aftershocks. The man in the lead was as calm as ever. Interesting technique. He threw out his palm to the counter. Darian's eyes flashed. He'd hid most of his inner energy inside his fist. The instant it came in contact with the man's palm, his inner energy would burst out and explode in the man's face. However, it didn't play out the way he'd imagined. The man redirected Darian's attack with a light push. He curled his hand into a fist and punched Darian in the chest, sending him flying across the hall. Everyone was in despair. Darian's martial arts far exceeded Joshua's, but he was defeated in 2 moves. Darian tried to get up, but it was useless. The other aristocrats hurried over to help him. Your martial arts are impressive, Tori said to the man. Can you tell me your name? You've provoked the aristocratic families, and they won't let you off. She and Darian were both at the martial grandmaster realm. From the way the man had toyed with him during the fight, she wouldn't stand a chance even if she was a bit stronger than Darian. The man laughed. After so many years, the aristocrats are still so full of themselves. Tori's uneasiness grew. Who exactly are you? Their group was arrogant, but they weren't reckless. She and Darian were among the strongest members of the aristocratic families. One of them had been taken down in 2 moves. That was proof that the 3 men weren't as simple as they seemed. Tori hoped the 3 men would back out after her threat. She would make a mental note of their names and report back to the family, who would then hunt them down in their stead. "I don't have time to bicker with you," the man said. He lifted his hood, and the other 2 men did the same. They introduced themselves. The man in the lead was Anton, and the 2 men behind him were Jakari and Claus. Perhaps it was because they'd wreaked havoc in California so long ago, but the guests had no impression of them. The aristocrats were different. They recognized their names, and they knew how serious their crimes were. Their group was no match for the 3 men. Even among the aristocratic families, they would have to ask one of the elders to deal with them. Anton noticed the look on Tori's face. "So you know who I am, little girl. Why don't you take your people and get out of here? I have more important things to take care of. If you leave, I'll forget this ever happened." The Cassidy family and the guests didn't know what was going on, but they had understood one thing from their conversation. These 3 men were not to be trifled with. DeAndre wasn't as confident as he was before. He never expected them to be the infamous criminals who'd gone on a murder spree in California back then. Even if the Fallon family gathered their forces, it wouldn't be easy to take them down. If they didn't handle this carefully, both the Cassidy and Fallon families could be wiped out. Tori was planning to leave with their group and take Joshua with them, but when she thought of Stephen's presence, she gave up on the idea. "What is your purpose for coming here today?" "I was going to annihilate the Haynes family, but the Cassidy family happened to be gathering all the tycoons in the state. I was interested, so I switched up the order of my targets and came here to pay a visit." Tori didn't hesitate to draw a line between the aristocrats and the outsiders. "DeAndre is a member of the Fallon family. Everyone else has no affiliation with us." "Sure, I'll leave him alone, but everyone else will have to submit," Anton said. He was aware of how powerful the aristocratic families were. They'd always stayed out of each other's business, so there was no need to start a conflict with them. He turned to the guests. "Now, are you going to submit or die?" The guests began to reassess the situation. Anton had taken Darian down in 2 moves. The aristocrats had proven themselves to be unreliable, and many of the guests decided to give up on them. They took the initiative to submit and offered up their assets. The father of the son who'd been killed was stricken with grief when everyone started surrendering. "What about the people they've killed? You can't do this!" The Haynes family was in a fluster. They'd never seen these 3 men before. When could they have the chance to provoke them? "He's right. You can't do this to us. What did we ever do wrong? We don't deserve this." Their voices were loud and grating on the ears. Claus threw a chair in their direction to shut them up. The Haynes family screamed and scattered across the hall. "It's because you're ranked first in Santa Ana," Jakari said. "The family ranked first back then is already gone, so you'll take their place." Back then, Anton, Claus, and Jakari had been captured by the government and the #1 families in Santa Ana and Los Angeles. After being detained in the 7 Stars prison for so many years, their desire for revenge had become an obsession. "We're not ranked first in Santa Ana," one of the Haynes family members protested. "We're just an ordinary family. If you're after the top family, then look for the Barclay family." Jakari was amused by their excuses. "I killed the Barclay family a while ago. They said the same thing before they died. They're probably lonely in the afterlife. I'm a generous person, so I'll give them companions." He gathered his inner energy at his fingertips and sharpened them into claws. He struck at the Haynes family member who was closest to them. It was Natalie, Kim's mother, and Stephen's mother-in-law. "Stephen, he's targeting Mom!" Kim exclaimed. "She'll be okay," Stephen said. A tall figure stepped between them in a gust of wind. With the wave of a man's hand, Jakari's inner energy dissipated, and he was forced to retreat. He wasn't expecting someone to interfere. The air currents surged as the dust settled. A young man was standing in front of Natalie. The guests didn't recognize him. Those who hadn't submitted yet began to mock the guest for making an impulsive decision. Kim breathed a sigh of relief. I told you, Stephen whispered. Mom will be fine. When did you contact your bodyguard? She whispered back. He's been here all this time. It's just that no one noticed. The Cassidy family recognized the young man with one glance. They hadn't seen him around for the past 6 months, but his striking appearance and impeccable formal attire was hard to forget. He was Stephen's bodyguard, Noor. A mere bodyguard had forced one of 3 criminals back when an aristocrat had been defeated in 2 moves. DeAndre once again felt like he'd made the wrong decision for kicking Stephen out of the family. The guest had no idea who Noor was, but that was the last thing on their minds. Their only concern was that their savior had arrived. The entire hall descended into chaos. Who are you? Jakari demanded. They'd only exchanged one blow, and he could sense that the young man's inner energy was far stronger than his own. It was rare to encounter a martial artist at this level, even among the aristocrats. There are only a handful of people who are allowed to call my name, Noor replied. You're not one of them. The Northern Guardian was the strongest martial artist from Hellcrown Palace. He had an endless amount of potential for martial arts. After being ambushed by Reeve and Blaine from Vindictus half a year ago and sustaining a serious injury, he'd taken a break from the front lines to recuperate. During this time, Stephen had given him some pointers. With his guidance, Noor's martial arts were much more profound than 6 months ago. Reeve, Blaine, and even Vito's martial arts from a century ago couldn't compare to Noor's. Anton held Jakari back before he could lunge for the young man. Being overconfident will lead to your downfall. That's none of your concern, Noor said. My boss has instructed me to protect the Haynes family. I won't let you lay a finger on them. The Haynes family was thrilled to hear that. If you protect us, we'll reward you handsomely. Noor didn't pay any attention to them. Rewards? How valuable could they be? The palace possessed half of the world's wealth and influence. The treasures they'd collected had accumulated over the years. There were so many that it was hard to keep track of them. As one of the 5 guardians of the palace, what could the Haynes family possibly offer him? Your boss sounds just as arrogant as you, Claus said. Do you really think you can stop us from wiping out the Haynes family by yourself? Noor shrugged. You can try. The 3 criminals looked at each other. Anton nodded at Claus, signaling for him to come forward. Claus smirked as he took out a handful of powder from his pocket and channeled his inner energy. His pale, wrinkled hand turned black, and a rotten smell permeated the air. Some of the guests couldn't stomach the stench and vomited. This is a combination of 10,000 poisons, Claus explained. You'll die if you come in contact with it. I'll give you one chance. If you value your life, then get out of the way. This was the strongest technique. Its toxicity was lethal. Back then, it was this technique that had killed the #1 martial artist in Santa Ana. Even the martial artists who were several stages above Claus's realm would have to be careful when dealing with this poison. Claus predicted that the young man would run with his tail between his legs. However, he hadn't taken a single step from where he stood. Is this the product of your life's work? Nora asked, thoroughly unimpressed. It's nothing compared to Devil Hall's poison. Claus was rendered speechless. Devil Hall was a mysterious organization, and they had rare and mystifying techniques at their disposal. They caused a huge stir every time one of their techniques were exposed to the world. He was confident in his skills for concocting poisons, but he didn't hold a candle to Devil Hall. Whether my poison is inferior or not, you can judge for yourself after you experience it firsthand. Kim watched nervously as the dark mist enveloped Noor. Stephen, aren't you worried about your bodyguard? She didn't know much about martial arts, but she could sense that Claus's mist was bad news. She'd never seen Noor in action before, so she didn't know how strong he was. You don't have to worry about him, Stephen said. He can handle it. Angelo and Stephanie had sneaked out of the house with Valeria without anyone noticing. Aston was in the vicinity with a group of guards from the palace to protect them. Stephen had been planning to leave with Kim and leave the rest up to the palace, but the 3 criminals' first target was Natalie. He wasn't part of the Cassidy family anymore, but she was Kim's mother. It was only appropriate for him to oversee her safety in person. Noor had been seething ever since he witnessed the Grand Palace Master being slapped across the face. He had every intention of barging into the house and turning the Cassidy family upside down. Given Noor's wild personality, Stephen had predicted this. While he was on the platform, he subtly signaled for him to stay put. Noor was forced to fume in the shadows. Just when he thought he was going to explode from anger, the three criminals crashed the party. That was when Stephen signaled for him to slip into the house and prepare to take action. Meanwhile, the battle had already begun at the center of the hall. Noor didn't have much experience in fighting martial artists who specialized in poisons. To be on the safe side, he held back to gauge Claus's strength. To the onlookers, they were evenly matched. Anton and Jakari were relieved to see that this was all the young man was capable of. He was strong, and his arrival had been outside their expectations, but it was nothing they couldn't handle. If Claus couldn't beat him on his own, then the three of them would attack him together. The guests who'd submitted began to cheer for Claus. The young man was having a hard time gaining the upper hand, and he was outnumbered. His defeat was imminent. As for Claus, he had a different assessment. As the battle went on, he grew increasingly uneasy. His poisons weren't effective, and whenever one of his attacks landed, they would be deflected without causing any damage. It was like the young man was immune to his poison and had a body of steel. Claus's barrier of inner energy was easily broken through whenever the young man counteracted. His martial arts were unfathomable. Claus knew that if this continued, he would end up losing. He couldn't waste any more time. During their next exchange, Claus blocked Noor's fist with brute force and used the momentum to step back. Noor chased after him and realized that Claus was preparing some kind of technique. His blackened hand emitted a foul smell, a stench that surpassed the limits of ordinary humans. The spectators retched from the smell, including the Cassidy family, DeAndre, and the aristocrats. This was the stench of corpses. The smell spread throughout the entire hall. When it approached Stephen, it dispersed with a wave of his hand. Kim was concerned to see her family retching. "What's happening?" "It's because of the mist. Stay close to me." At the center of the hall, Claus used the stench of the mist to his advantage and launched a surprise attack on Noor. Noor had been testing Claus the entire time, and he'd seen enough of his martial arts to gauge his strength. It was time to end this. He lifted his hand, and in a flash of emerald light, a phantom of a dragon appeared behind him. An immense pressure bore down on the spectators. Many of them lost their balance. The dragon opened its eyes and roared, sending shockwaves across the hall. The ability to manifest phantoms was a sign that a martial artist had reached the Divine Grandmaster realm. Augmenting the world's natural phenomenon amplified their strength to an entirely new level. This was the most obvious difference between a martial grandmaster and a divine grandmaster. Tori was in shock. Noor was a divine grandmaster. She'd never thought someone at his level would make an appearance at a birthday celebration hosted by the tiny Cassidy family. Out of all the aristocrats she knew, Dale was probably the only divine grandmaster, and he wasn't as strong as Noor. Just what was Noor's true identity? The fence-sitter guests who had originally been cheering for Claus stopped short at the sight of the majestic dragon. When Noor's manifestation dove for Claus, he stopped mid-attack and yelled at his companions for help. "Get over here!" Anton and Jakari realized the gravity of the situation and rushed to unleash their strongest techniques. The four of them clashed, and an explosion swept the hall. The mansion shook, and the floor was on the verge of splitting open. Sound waves reverberated in the air, knocking countless spectators unconscious. Blood trickled from their ears. Anton, Jakari, and Claus were knocked back from the impact and forced to retreat. The dragon flew back to Noor's side, and he returned to his position in front of the Haynes family. Anton wiped the blood from his mouth. "I never expected a martial artist like him to show up. Why is there a divine grandmaster hiding in the district in the first place?" Jakari gritted out. His clothes were tattered, and his right arm was twisted at an angle. He dislocated his shoulder when he took a direct hit from Noor's manifestation. Jakari steeled his expression as he straightened his arm, pushing the bone back into the socket. The crack resounded in the hall, and the Cassidy family turned pale. DeAndre didn't notice. He was too busy observing Noor. He needed someone to clean up this mess, but that person could not be Stephen's bodyguard. From Noor's brief exchange with the three criminals, his profound martial arts were obvious. If he was already this strong, what would happen if Stephen asked him to wipe out the Cassidy family? DeAndre had already given up on his plan to ask the aristocratic families to defend their families. The aristocrats present had witnessed Noor's martial arts, and there was no way the aristocratic families would agree to it, even if DeAndre was Wayne's uncle. Not only would they refuse, but they would also demand that he apologize to Stephen. Noor was a divine grandmaster, and no one could afford to provoke him. The guests who had sided with the three criminals were deathly pale. They made the wrong decision. They had thought that the criminals were invincible because they'd taken down an aristocrat with relative ease, but all three of them had been forced back from one of Noor's attacks. On the other hand, Noor retained his calm demeanor, as if nothing had happened. He looked like he hadn't broken a sweat. "We admit our martial arts is inferior to yours," Anton said. "Do what you want. We're done here." The Haynes family was relieved that the three criminals were about to leave. It was a miracle that they'd survived. The guest who'd joined hands with the criminals began to argue. "You can't just leave us. This is a breach of contract. Don't abandon us. Didn't you brag that you were strong? Take him down." "Shut it," Claus yelled. Out of the three of them, he'd sustained the most serious injuries. He appeared fine on the surface, but he'd taken the brunt of the damage from the young man's manifestation. The meridians in his right arm were completely destroyed. This injury permanently reduced the strength of the poison techniques he'd developed for years by 10%. It was a huge blow to his life's work. As Claus was silencing the guests, an idea came to him. He might as well vent his frustrations on the annoying guests. The young man was only here to protect the Haynes family anyway. Since the Cassidy family were their in-laws, as long as Claus excluded those two groups, the young man wouldn't stop him. "I didn't know your bodyguard was so strong," Kim said in surprise. She didn't know what a divine grandmaster was, but from everyone's reactions, Noor's martial arts were quite impressive. Stephen took her hand in his with a smile. "I told you, you don't need to worry about him or your family. I've got everything under control." At this time, Claus had released his dark mist and was scanning the crowd for a target. The guests avoided making eye contact. They didn't want to suffer his wrath. A man and a woman in the corner drew Claus's attention. They were part of the group that had wanted to leave. There were only two of them remaining, and they were whispering to each other, not paying any mind to the center of the hall. Their nonchalance got on Claus's nerves, and he decided that they would be his new victims. It took him a split second to send out a cloud of dark mist towards the two people in the corner. It happened so fast and none of the onlookers could react in time, including the aristocrats on the platform. Noor hadn't seen it coming either. Stephen had given him a mission to protect the Haynes family, and by extension, the Cassidy family. But as the northern guardian of the palace, his main responsibility was to protect the Grand Palace Master. Noor knew that the poison mist was nothing but a breeze to Stephen, but allowing his opponent's attack to slip past him and reach the Grand Palace Master was a grave oversight. As for the Cassidy family, they watched in anticipation as an equation formulated in their heads. From what they'd heard about the aristocrats, Kylan was an average member from the aristocratic families, while Darian's group were elites. Since Stephen had lost to Kylan and Darian had lost to Anton, there was a 0% chance of Stephen surviving Claus's attack. DeAndre shared the same mindset. If Stephen was killed, Noor's attention would shift to the three criminals. He would stop at nothing to hunt them down. And after that, because his employer was dead, there'd be no one around to give him orders. The Cassidy family wouldn't have to worry about Stephen's revenge. Stephen's death would benefit everyone. A cold glint flickered in Stephen's eyes. Attacking a bystander? How underhanded. He wouldn't have been as angry if he was the only one Claus had targeted, but Kim was also in the range of his mist. Stephen threw out a wave of inner energy before the poison could get close to them. It enveloped the mist, compressing the poison into a small black crystal. Noor appeared in front of Stephen, and under everyone's astonished gazes, he knelt on one knee. "I'm sorry, Mr. Adams. I should have been paying more attention." Those who didn't know he was Stephen's bodyguard were taken aback. The insanely skilled martial artist who'd taken down the three criminals by himself worked for the unfavored son-in-law of the Cassidy family. What exactly was Stephen's identity? Unlike in the past, Stephen didn't stop Nor from getting down on one knee. "It's fine, you did well." He turned to look at the three criminals. "You could have left, but it's too late now." "Who are you?" Anton demanded. A light-hearted voice with a hint of warning sounded in the hall. "You aren't worthy of knowing his identity." Claus looked around, searching for the source of the voice. "Stop sneaking around! Get out here!" Stephen turned around to find a young man in a white uniform walking towards him with a bright smile. It was Jace. "Mr. Adams, may I deal with those three?" Stephen nodded. "Nor, you can leave the rest to him." Understood. Nor vanished and reappeared behind Stephen in a flash of light. "And who are you?" Claus demanded. He'd been humiliated several times today, and he was furious. Jace was still smiling, but he wasn't as polite with the three criminals. "Who I am is none of your business. Just know that the three of you will die here." The Leviathan unit had issued a death sentence for any prisoner who'd escaped from the Seven Stars prison. Those who worked for the country had the authority to kill them on sight, and they'd be given an award according to the prisoner's identity. The official announcement hadn't been made yet, but in at most a month, everyone in the country would know about it. Anton was displeased by Jace's disrespectful attitude. He unleashed a black aura that spread through the hall. It carried a chill that made the guests shiver. Jace dispersed Anton's aura with the wave of his hand. "It's bold of you to attack civilians right in front of me. I don't have time to waste on you. Please die." His aura surged, and a phantom of a wolf appeared behind him. Jakari recognized the manifestation. It was a spitting image of the wolf he'd seen at the Seven Stars prison. "You're Jace Sinclair, a member of the Empyrean Circle." His words echoed throughout the entire hall. Everyone was dumbfounded. It was a bit troublesome that his identity had been revealed, but Jace took it in stride. "I suppose you're one of the prisoners who escaped after I left. I'm not that big of a deal. I'm only ranked 4th. The crowd wasn't as calm as him. The young man in a white uniform was a member of the Empyrean Circle, and he was ranked 4th. Today's celebration wasn't that big of an event, but there were suddenly many big shots attending. Those who hadn't expressed their support for the three criminals dropped to one knee to greet Jace. Even many of the other families who'd submitted followed suit, hoping to pretend that their past actions never happened. After all, who could compete with the Empyrean Circle member? More than half the crowd fell to their knees. There were only a handful of people who remained standing. This included the aristocrats, because a majority of the Empyrean Circle were from the aristocratic families. DeAndre was delighted to see Jace. After multiple unforeseen events, the situation had escalated beyond his control. Stephen's martial arts had recovered, and his bodyguard was a divine Grand Master. Stephen had promised to let today's fiasco go, but the Cassidy family couldn't rely on his words alone. They'd mistreated him in public. There was no telling when he would turn around and retaliate. Now that Jace was here, their family was saved. Harry was puzzled. Why would an Empyrean Circle member attend our celebration? Although the Cassidy family was ranked 1st, they only had reached this stage because of their affiliation with the Fallon family. If they were on their own, they would barely manage to be categorized as a noble family. And even then, they wouldn't have any particular influence. Above the noble families were the Royal, Imperial, and Beaumont families. There'd be a long way to go before they reached the top. Royal, Imperial, and Beaumont families may not have the qualifications to ever meet an Empyrean Circle member, let alone the Cassidy family. Rebecca's eyes lit up. I know why he's here. It's because of Tyrell. He's also part of the Empyrean Circle. They're colleagues. It's only right for them to look out for each other. Her reasoning convinced the rest of the Cassidy family. Even the Haynes family believed her. Any concerns DeAndre had left were washed away. He'd already taken Helen to the back room when Stephen's bodyguard appeared. He didn't have to worry about her. As expected of Tyrell, our family is blessed to have him. The guests were divided into two factions. One side was brimming with excitement. The Cassidy family was so influential that they could ask an Empyrean Circle member to come over at any time. The more they thought about it, the more they felt like pledging their allegiance to the family was the right thing to do. As for the guests who'd supported the criminals, they were regretting their actions. If they had known earlier that the Cassidy family was this influential, they never would have switched sides. "Stephen, do we also have to kneel?" Kim asked, feeling uneasy. When she noticed the excited expressions on the Cassidy family's faces, a sense of crisis overcame her. She and Stephen had left the family. Because they weren't affiliated anymore, their status at the celebration was equivalent to that of the guests. And those of a lower status were required to pay their respects to the high-ranking officers of the country. "There is no need for that," Stephen replied nonchalantly. "But we're not part of the family anymore," Kim said. "If they take offense, who's stopping them from asking Jace to get back at you?" Stephen was amused at the thought. "Even if we stand here, he won't lay a hand on me." "Stephen, this is not the time to joke around. This is serious." "I'm being honest. He wouldn't attack me. Why don't we make a bet? Let's wait 1 minute. After he cleans up those 3 criminals, he'll come over and greet me." Their conversation led to mockery from the surrounding guests. "You're just the former commander. Know your place." "I think you've lost your mind. Mr. Jace outranks you by a mile. Do you think you're the sovereign or something?" Kim ignored their sarcastic remarks. "You can't gamble with your life." Stephen wrapped his arms around her and gave her a reassuring hug. "It'll be okay. Trust me." At the same time, he released his aura. The guests nearby shut their mouths when they felt the heavy pressure boring down on them. They knew provoking Stephen any further would be a huge mistake, but this humiliation made them uncomfortable. They cursed him in their heads and hoped that Jace would come over and teach him a lesson when he was done. As for the man in question, Jace was oblivious to the conflict in the corner. He was confronting the 3 criminals. Anton was intimidated, but he didn't let it show. "Should I say it's an honor for a big shot like you to personally seek us out?" "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jace said. "I have some business to attend to in the district. You 3 happen to be in my area, that's all. I'm a soldier, you know. Protecting the civilians is what I do." Claus had already reined in his anger. He was full of himself, but he still had a brain. In the face of an opponent he couldn't beat, maintaining his rationality was the key to survival. "Did anyone ever tell you you have a pretentious way of speaking?" "What's the big deal? You 3 were also talking pretentiously just now. What was it again? If you don't submit to me, then die. Did I get that right? Then I'll give you an ultimatum of my own. If you can take 1 attack from me, I'll let you go. But if you can't, then die. Is that all right with you?" Jace was polite to everyone, and he spoke nothing but the truth, but his sarcastic and provocative manner of speech never failed to get a rise out of those on the receiving end. The temperamental Claus was insulted and prepared to attack, but the quick-witted Jakari pulled him back. "Don't be rash. We're no match for him." Jace gave them a disappointed look. "You don't have the courage to face me. You only harass these civilians because they're ordinary people. If you 3 don't want to make the first move, then I will." His aura surged, and his manifestation came alive. It howled and lunged for the 3 criminals at lightning speed. A massive wolf that was 30 feet in length and hunting its prey made for an impressive visual effect for movies. The 3 criminals were forced into battle, protesting all the while. "We didn't attack you, so why are you attacking us? This is unreasonable." Jace scoffed. "Being reasonable with criminals like you is pointless." When the criminals clashed with the manifestation, a black mist spewed into the air, shrouding the center of the collision. "Is he dead?" Anton asked. "He has to be," Claus said confidently. "He may be part of the Empyrean Circle, but even he can't resist the effects of my poison." Most of the people in the hall were ordinary people with no knowledge of martial arts. The criminals' conversation made them nervous. It'd be a disaster if Jace lost. The Cassidy family was worried, but DeAndre was calm. "Don't underestimate the Empyrean Circle. A technique of this level would impose any threat to them. If you don't believe me, you can ask our reinforcements." Everyone turned to stare at Tori, Darian, and the others in the group. Seeing that everyone was looking at them, Tori awkwardly nodded. Her response quelled the anxiety in the hall. At this time, the black mist dispersed. Jace was standing in the same spot with his manifestation. He was unharmed. Like DeAndre and Tori's group had said, the poison was not effective. Is that all you've got? Then let's wrap this up. I have more important things to do. Claus was unnerved to see that his technique had failed, but he forced himself to respond. That was only the beginning. Jace smiled, but there was no amusement in his expression. Is that so? Then do your best to survive my wind. He flexed his hand and threw out a fist, sending a gust of wind in their direction. To the onlookers, his fist didn't look to contain any force, but the three criminals had a drastically different reaction. They yelled at each other frantically. Get out of the way! I can't, there's nowhere to run. We're trapped. An earth-shattering explosion erupted, shaking the entire mansion. Many of the guests lost their balance and fell off their seats. Their eyes were wide with fear, not knowing what had happened. The image of Jace punching the air vanished. His movements were so fast that he'd left behind an after-image. The real him had thrown that punch a while ago. The smoke dissipated. The criminals who'd been arrogant just moments before had collapsed into a heap on the floor. Jace's wind had struck them square in the chest. The crowd cheered for Jace and showered him with praise. He's simply amazing! Long live the Empyrean Circle! The Cassidy family could hardly contain their excitement. Jace's display of martial arts was astounding. They were even more excited when he dusted his uniform, turned around, and started walking towards them. Rebecca's reasoning was more convincing than ever. The guests who just escaped death and experienced a roller coaster of emotions began to whisper amongst themselves. This is unbelievable. The Cassidy family has connections with the Empyrean Circle. If I knew that they were this influential, I never would have sided with those criminals. I want to follow with the Cassidy family for the rest of my life. California is so fortunate to have them. The Cassidy family held their heads high and enjoyed the compliments. DeAndre led Helen out of the back room and went up to Jace with the rest of the family to greet him. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Jace. I'm DeAndre Fallon. Thank you for assisting us. There's no need to thank me, Jace said with a nod. I have a duty to protect the people. He had no idea who they were, but it seemed like he'd saved these people before, so it was only appropriate for him to accept their gratitude. As a member of the Empyrean Circle, he'd saved countless civilians in the past, and he'd accepted many such thanks before. This was nothing new. DeAndre was confused when Jace didn't have a reaction to his name. If Jace was here because of Tyrell, shouldn't he know who he was? Maybe Jace was the type of person who kept his emotions hidden. I'd like to request your assistance for another matter. There's another criminal here. Jace wasn't paying much attention to DeAndre, but he perked up at the mention of another criminal. Where are they? The strange misunderstanding continued. The Cassidy family was impressed that DeAndre could be so composed in front of an Empyrean Circle member and talk to him like old acquaintances. They didn't have the courage to join in, so they watched from behind him. DeAndre's interaction with Jace deepened the guests' respect for them. DeAndre was full of grief and indignation as he pointed at Stephen in the corner. The criminal is none other than Stephen. We are holding a celebration for my birthday, but he brought counterfeit goods into my house and injured a member of my family. In the past, he attempted to take credit for Tyrell's achievements. He relies on his status as the former commander, so no one has been able to make him atone for his crimes. The Cassidy family wasted no time to back up DeAndre's accusations. They had thoroughly offended Stephen. They wouldn't be able to stop him if he sent his bodyguards after them. They had to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of Stephen for good. I heard he killed people in the back alley. Some time ago, he tarnished our country's reputation by defecting overseas. His crimes are unforgivable. He even disrespected Tyrell. Stephen was charged with numerous crimes in an instant. The guests chimed in. I heard he beats people up on the streets. He has no concept of the law. He's the founder of an organization that sells firearms. He ruined multiple companies and caused countless employees to lose their jobs. Consequently, Stephen was charged with numerous fabricated crimes. Everyone was yelling at once, and Jace felt a headache coming on. He realized that there was some kind of misunderstanding between him and DeAndre's family. He'd heard about the Cassidy family from Tyrell before, but he didn't expect these people to be his relatives. On another note, Jace couldn't understand why Stephen was just letting this happen. He'd gone to hell and back for the country, but he was letting these clowns mock him. Jace raised his voice above the crowd. "That's enough." The endless chatter died down, and a resounding slap rang out. Everyone was stunned. DeAndre staggered and held his cheek in a daze. Jace had given him a backhand to the face. The onlookers made way for Jace as he strode out of the crowd and walked up to Stephen. Kim's anxiety was growing by the second. Jace was heading their way with a menacing look on his face. She tried to pull out of Stephen's embrace and drag him out of the house, but he held her securely in his arms. This is it, Kim thought. They were done for. Jace was half a head taller than Stephen. Their height difference was more noticeable when they were together. Judging by appearances alone, Jace seemed like he had the upper hand. Everyone watched with bated breath. Just when they thought a fight would break out, Jace dropped to one knee in the same way the guest had knelt for him when he first arrived. "I apologize for my belated greeting, Mr. Adams. I'm here on behalf of the Leviathan unit." Kim's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked down at Jace and then back up at Stephen. Was she dreaming? Why in the world would a high-ranking officer of the country kneel to Stephen? She wasn't the only one in shock. Everyone else in the hall was astonished. The Empyrean Circle member ranked 4th was kneeling in front of a good-for-nothing son-in-law of the Cassidy family. It was an unbelievable scene. Helen staggered and had to clutch the table for support. Harry and Rebecca felt lightheaded from the shock. There was only one thought in their minds. A member of the Empyrean Circle knelt in front of Stephen. Stephen helped Jace up with a smile. "I've retired. You don't have to be so formal with me." Jace shook his head. "To me and the rest of the Empyrean Circle, you will always be the sovereign." Jace turned around and glared at everyone in the hall. "How dare you disrespect the divine sovereign? This is a serious offense, and there will be severe consequences."